Hello everyone, I'm Becky Goldsmith with Piece of Cake, and I'm going to walk you through some of the stitching to make this cute little kangaroo. It's a kit from Threadfollower. Inside is the felted wool and the stuffing and my needle and thread. And I've already removed the pattern and the instructions from the box because I wanted to make a copy of this onto cardstock so that I can make templates for my shapes. And to make the cardstock even a little more powerful, I'm going to cover it with the peel and stick laminate. Now I can either stick it to the top, or what I like to do is peel the backing sheet off and stick this to the sticky stuff, just like that. And then I'm going to use my paper scissors and I'll cut the shapes off, and then I'll be back. The instructions tell you to cut out the paper shapes, the paper templates, and either pin or baste them to the felt to cut them out. And you already saw that I didn't do that. I made templates. The next thing I want to do is trace around the templates onto the felted wool. The kangaroo has two sides and they're mirror images of each other. If this had a right or wrong side, I would need to put this either right or wrong sides together. What I'm going to do is trace around the shapes on the top piece of felted wool. And then I'll come back and show you how I pin them together so that I can cut two at once. And the pins I use, so the pinning and the cutting. I'll be back. I traced the shapes with the felt laying on top of my sandboard, and I used my Blackwing 602 pencil. Any of the Blackwings with the firm or extra firm graphite would be good. And I did trace only on single thicknesses of felt. These are the shapes that you have to cut two of. These shapes you only have to cut one of, so I only traced on a single thickness for those. The pins I'm using are Karen K. Buckley's Shorter Perfect pins. And the reason I'm using these is because they are really fine and flexible, so they don't make the felt hump up. The downside to these pins is that they are so flexible they can be hard to maneuver in the fabric. Be sure to use good scissors here, because you're cutting through two layers that are pretty thick. And if you're using scissors that are not very sharp, it's going to make the layers skew out of whack. I'm using my professional scissors. They're perfect. The Hovels scissors that I carry online with the pink handle, they would be nice. I think they're 6 inches. Really, any of the serrated scissors that I carry online would work. In fact, there is a Kai embroidery scissor that might be very nice for this. Now, can you see that as I was cutting, that was trying to wander off? What I might do is go ahead and cut that free, and I want to be very sure that my layers are going to stay together. The next step is to whip stitch the two body parts together. You will whip stitch them with the right sides out. So if there is something on here that you don't like the looks of on the outside of your kangaroo, you would want to reposition this. But mine are fine, and I've already got these shapes pinned together from when I cut them. The thread included in the kit has a pretty strong contrast to the wool felt. It is a 6-strand embroidery floss. The instructions tell you to split this and use 3 strands at a time. Personally, I prefer to sew this with my wool thread. This is a wool acrylic blend made by Wonderfill. I do carry it on my site. I've done a little testing, And you could use a double strand, but I like the quietness of a single strand of this wool. So that's what I've loaded onto my needle. The kangaroo base gets sewn to the round bottom. So I am going to send the needle back toward that corner and then come back over it to give that a nice join. I didn't start with the knot back there because there's so little of the fabric. I want to move that stitch more to the front. I use my fingernails to help me not catch too much of the wool felt. Wool felt is not woven. The fibers do not come apart at the edge of the fabric. So you can make your stitches very close to the edge. And you might notice that what I'm doing here is sewing with the needle at an angle. I'm coming down toward myself. What I want to leave are straight stitches on the outside edge of that seam. So where I put my needle in is right across from where that thread has come out. I travel at a diagonal through the two layers and then come up at the beginning of my next stitch. It just feels more natural to me to make this stitch toward myself, but it may not feel natural to you. If sewing toward yourself doesn't work, then you can try sewing from right to left or left to right if you are left-handed. In that case, you need to move it so that the thread comes out of the bottom, and you would stitch going from right to left, still catching just a tiny little bit of the edge of the felt through. Now I'm going to place the tail there. Make sure the tail curls the right way. The pattern doesn't include much seam allowance at all. I'm actually scooting a little more than is required inside there. And I'm going to try to pin that in place just a little bit to help hold it. And now I'm going to sew through the layers here. Now you can't continue to do a whip stitch through all the layers, so you have choices. You can go through the tail and then back this way through the layers. That pin was in the way, so I had to take it out. To make my stitch, I'm going to go in next to the body of the kangaroo, travel down, and then come up through all those layers. My stitch on the back is a little bit angled, and I don't think that matters. I just want to be sure that I'm catching all the layers and that the tail itself is still inside the body. Now, what if the tail wandered out? Is that the end of the world? No, it really isn't. You can always sew it back together. This is just sewing. This is needle and thread. It does not have to be perfect. And I'm going to add here, it is not going to feel perfect to you. So I look at mine and I think, well, my stitches are reasonably good. Are they perfect? No, they're not perfect. That's okay. So I've sewn to the end. I want to do a tack stitch here. But I have a lot of thread, maybe enough to sew the bottom on the kangaroo. So I'm going to park my needle out of the way and then stuff the kangaroo. You want to be sure and save enough wool to stuff the little joey. And in fact, when I pulled my stuffing out, it was almost like there were two pieces, one big piece and one small piece. I've set aside the small piece for the Joey. Just stuff it evenly. You can choose how tightly stuffed you want your kangaroo. And it's important to think about, is it going to sit? Do you want it to sit somewhere? And if so, do you want to try to make the bottom of this flat so that it sits well? I think I'm going to leave mine about like that. I could add some beans or marbles or something to weight the bottom. I don't think I'm going to, but I could. The front center of the base of the kangaroo is marked on the template. I'm going to put a pin here. And as long as I'm doing that, I may as well turn it around and mark center back. Next, turn your kangaroo so that you can pin the base to the body. And I'm going to use my 3/4 inch pins from Clover because they are more rigid than the other pins I was using. And for this, I need a slightly more rigid pin. Once the kangaroo base is pinned in place, you can sew it in exactly the same manner as before. So I'm going to sew from right to left around the base with a whip stitch. I try to keep my stitches not quite 1/8 of an inch apart. All right, I will come back once I have the base sewn to the kangaroo. The instructions say next to sew the pouch to the front and then the ears. But I know that the ears are going to be trickier, and I feel certain that you'll be able to pin and whip stitch the pouch to the front. So I'm going to jump to the ears and look at them. The instructions show sewing the bottom of the ear together. So that's what I did. And then they tell you on the template where to put the ear, which is about here. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, it is hard to both hold and sew this in place at the same time. I'm going to use a couple of pins directly into the body of the kangaroo to do that. And then I'm going to sew this down with a whip stitch. Keeping in mind all the time that this is hand sewing and there may be a variety of so-called right ways to do it. Your right way and my right way might be two different things, but I think that's how the ears should. Oh yeah, that's pretty cute. There's one ear. So I'm going to give this an extra little back stitch, and then I'm going to carry the thread across to about the same place on the other side. I tried carrying the thread across to sew the other ear on until I realized that I hadn't sewn the base of the other ear. And then I tried to just sew it on without having sewn the bottom of the ear together. That doesn't really work. In case you wanted to try that, just know it doesn't work very well. It really does work better if you sew the bottom of the ear like that, and then you come over and attach it to the body of the kangaroo. Okay, that is looking much more like a kangaroo. The instructions don't exactly say, but when you sew the pouch to the body, there's a kind of curve at the bottom of the pouch piece. Be sure that you sew the bottom of the body and really the bottom, these two pieces in this seam, to the bottom of the pouch. Kind of pulls up the front and it gives you a cleaner look. I've already sewn the body of the Joey together and stuffed it and sewn the edge closed, and I didn't exactly follow instructions. I folded the base of the ears and tried to sew it into the body pieces as I was going, with limited success. It doesn't curl as neatly as it should. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fix that. I've got my thread knotted, and I'm going to come in here and just take a little stitch there and make that ear curl. And then I'm going to feed my thread through to the other side, to the other ear, and do the same thing. I can do this with the wool thread because it blends in. I don't think this little trick would work quite as well with the pearl cotton because it would show too much. I'm going to do just a tiny little knot, and then I'll bury my knot and call that done. Okay. So now that my Joey ears are nice and curly, I'm going to test it out and put the little critter right in there. He's pretty cute, but these are not finished yet. The Joey needs a nose and the kangaroo needs 2 eyes. So I'm going to do that next. The Joey gets a nose right about here, and I'm going to bring my thread in from the back. And I did make a little knot on it. I'm going to just cut that off nearly flush and not worry about it because that's on the back. And then just a little kind of satin stitch nose. I switched to the pearl cotton because I wanted a little contrast so his little nose would show. That looks pretty good. Going to take this to the back. Oh yeah, cute enough. The kangaroo gets eyes, and the pattern shows just indented eyes. I'm going to take my thread right about here where I think the eyes should be, straight through. And then I'm going to tie a little knot right there. And then I'm going to go back through to the first side. You can kind of spot it and pull that in. And now I can cut those tails off and then go back. And you can pull that in as much as you think it should be pulled in. You could make a little X, you could make a little knot, you could add a bead, you could do all kinds of things. I'm keeping it simple, just going back and forth, leaving enough stitches so that the eye has some definition. And there she is. I don't know if you noticed, but I refer to her as a he multiple times, but she's obviously a she. I added a bow around her neck because I thought it would be very cute, and it is. You could add other embellishments to your kangaroo. This is a pretty straightforward crafting project. If you already know how to sew, it's right up there with easy. If you're new to sewing, it might be a little bit more of a challenge, but it's doable. I would encourage you to share this with someone younger than you or someone who just wants to get started. And emphasize that it doesn't have to be perfect. My stitches are not perfect. The key is that she holds together. She's really cute. This would be a wonderful present for someone or just to have for yourself. I know what I'm going to do with mine. My husband teaches at Austin College, and their mascot is the Roo. So my husband is going to get a Roo plus a Joey. And in fact, I have friends whose husbands are also Roos. I've already made one extra in red because our Roos are red. So now, side note, I made this one with felted wool, which is woven wool that's been felted. The edges are a little rougher when you work with woven wool that's been felted. Wool felt gives you a smoother finish. So keep that in mind because they are both very, very cute. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and may you have many happy stitches.